Growing pressure on President Biden to crack down on Mexican cartels after 4 Americans are kidnapped, with 2 of them being murdered just across our southern border.
Texas Congressman Dan Crenshaw is pushing for action, sharing his thoughts and message for Mexico's president. Watch this.
Hago un llamado al presidente de México, el presidente de Estados Unidos, para que avancen con un plan para luchar juntos contra los carteles. Será lo mejor para la gente de ambos países.
All right, Congressman Dan Crenshaw joins us right now. Congressman, great to see you. Thought a guy in Texas with your military background would want to take action here. Do you believe the Mexican government understands that we need to take action here?
Well, according to the Mexican president, López Obrador, he apparently doesn't. He can't possibly understand why we think that it's a bad thing that over 70,000 Americans a year are being killed by fentanyl poisoning. And that poisoning is coming from 2 main cartels, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel. He doesn't seem to understand it. He called what I said propaganda. He said it's for electoral purposes. He has no idea what he's talking about. It's actually infuriating. And it should be infuriating to Mexicans, too, because, you know, there's only one other group of people that's terrorized more by the Mexican cartels than Americans, and that's the Mexican people. They're sick of this. They're sick of their corrupt politicians taking money from the cartels. They want safety. They want prosperity. And look, and Americans want that for the country of Mexico. I mean, if you could choose one other country besides the United States that you would make 10 times better than it is right now, you would choose Mexico. It's a very important ally. Right. This president needs to get out of the way and work with us. We just want to help him.
One of the things the White House said the other day, Congressman, was that it was laughable. She said that fentanyl is at historically low levels right now, which we know the seizures are way through the roof. Also, she commented, KJP did, on a suggestion you've had to designate cartels as terrorist outfits. Watch this.
Designating these cartels as FTOs would not grant us any additional authorities that we don't really have at this time. So the United States has powerful sanctions authorities specifically designated to combat narcotics trafficking organizations and the individuals and entities that enable them. So we have not been afraid to use them.
So your suggestion won't work, she says.
Well, no, I actually want to clarify something. So I've never said we should designate them as terrorists. There's a really good reason for that. If you designate them as terrorists, you just created millions of more legal asylum seekers south of our border. You actually make our immigration crisis far, far worse. So this is the one thing I agree with her on. Now, she's totally wrong that the fentanyl crisis is in an all-time low. An all-time low since when? Like last week? Like, and you know, by how much? I mean, this is ridiculous. We're losing tens of thousands of people. We're confiscating hundreds and hundreds of pounds, which can kill the entire population of the United States 10 times over, just basically on a monthly basis. So, no, she's absolutely wrong about that. What we need to do is look, authorize military force. Now that means a couple of things. It doesn't mean tanks rolling into Mexico the next day. What it means is we can use our intelligence collections capabilities. It means we can work by, with, and through the Mexican military in order to target them. We can put our assets to bear on this problem. I want to do it with the government of Mexico, and this is what I would tell AMLO, the president of Mexico. We need to increase penalties against them. So all of the authorities that come with a terrorist designation, I have a bill that gives you all of those authorities, goes after their finances, sanctions Mexican officials that aid and abet them without designating them terrorists. Now, look, are they obviously terrorists? Of course, they act like terrorists. But if you designate them that way, you will make our immigration crisis much worse. And so that's my message to a bunch of senators, too, who are pushing legislation to that end. I know it makes a good headline, but it's a really, really bad idea when it comes to our immigration crisis.
Yesterday, active service members and veterans were in Washington for the House Foreign Affairs hearing, one of many hearings we expect to see. And it was very emotional. They were talking about the withdrawal of Afghanistan, and former Marine Sergeant Tyler Vargas Andrews, I'm not sure if you saw his testimony, but he had to take many moments just to pause because he was getting emotional and crying. He lost 13 Americans there, and he said they were up in the tower, and his team leader was ready. He's a sniper. He was ready to take out the suicide bomber. And they didn't get the AOK from the military or from the administration, so they didn't do it. And they think that was the guy who was responsible for killing 13 Americans. Listen to some of that testimony, and we'll get your reaction on the other side.
Flash and a massive wave of pressure I'm thrown 12 feet onto the ground, but instantly knew what had happened. I opened my eyes to Marines dead or unconscious, lying around me. The withdrawal was a catastrophe, in my opinion.
Dan, he lost an arm, he lost a leg, 100 to 150 ball bearings were in his body. He said his right arm was shredded, his lower abdomen was soaked in blood and ripped open. Awful to hear that, and many of the parents of these Americans say this could have all been prevented. What do you say?
They're absolutely right, and that's just a heartbreaking testimony. Yeah. You know, and what's heartbreaking too, I think the American people have largely forgotten this and largely forgotten who's responsible, which is one person. It's President Biden. Those 13 families haven't forgotten. That brave Marine who was just testifying, he certainly hasn't forgotten. And I want them to know that Republicans in Congress haven't forgotten either. That's why we're doing these hearings. That's why we're going to hold President Biden accountable. This was a disaster on epic scale. The decision making was so poorly thought out. I mean, let's just list a few things. Pulling out of Kabul airport instead of Bagram. So they decided to evacuate Bagram because President Biden wanted one thing. He wanted 0 troops. That was his entire policy, right? 0 troops. Now, his military told him this was a terrible idea. He didn't listen to them. All right. Then he put State Department in charge instead of the military. So they didn't have these clear rules of engagement. And that's why this Marine didn't know what he was supposed to do, because they wouldn't give him that clear direction. It was horrible, and it was just completely unacceptable. Okay. President Biden is to blame.
All right.
And you're sharing the screen with some of the most horrific military images you could possibly have that day, and how many people left behind, and private organizations had to go save them, not our military, which is horrific. Dan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great to be with y'all.
All right.